In this session, we're going to talk about fleet strategy for a few minutes to help you just understand the mindset or a mindset that we have found to be very beneficial for FedEx contractors and the way that Hello Truck Lease and maybe even purchasing trucks can help combine and make sure that that fleet strategy is properly supported. All right, let's take the following path. So when we talk about fleet strategy, what does that tangibly look like? What we recommend is refreshing at least 20% of your fleet each year. That doesn't mean you have to buy 20% of your fleet's trucks every year or lease. It can be some combination of. So we're going to keep this simple. Let's talk about a 10 truck fleet. What I've got to think about to be able to meet that goal, meet that standard, is if I've got a 10 truck fleet, I've got to find a way to pay for 2 trucks each year. Okay? That means bringing 2 new trucks into the fleet each year. Why 20% would be maybe somebody's question in that instance. Well, plenty of trucks are going to be at the end of their useful life, at the end of a 5-year term. Whether they've quite hit that 250,000 mile mark or not, that we consider to be a reasonable useful life for these step vans, ultimately, many will be approaching that useful life at the end of a 5-year period. And if you've financed those trucks, your financing is probably running out at about the same time. So what happens is you've all of a sudden got some number of trucks that you're paying off, but are probably pretty used up at the same time. And you're all of a sudden having this cycle of big capital outlay obligations, which is the biggest hardship for a FedEx contractor to overcome, is the truck capital outlay. And if you're in that cycle, if you're in a 5-year cycle, then you're gonna every few years, certainly every 5, you're gonna have a big pain point within your operation. So the way to mitigate that, the way to plan around that is just say 20% of my fleet, I'm gonna bite that much of it off each year. In the case of a 10 truck fleet, that means you've got to figure out a way to get 2 trucks every year so that when you get to the end of that 5-year term, your entire fleet is 5 years old or newer, regardless of how you paid for it, lease or buy. And it gives you the option as well for the trucks at the end of that 5 years that are still good. Then you've got trucks that can be used in the operation for spares or for growth opportunities or to rent out to other contractors when they're having issues. It just gives you so many more options than you have if you don't have this strategy in place. So let's talk a little bit about what that looks like. In the case of financing the trucks to meet that 20% per year threshold, then a 75,000 mile truck is going to require 10% down, $7,500 times 2, because you've got your 2 trucks in that instance. So you're having to find a way to come up with $15,000 in a given year and then take on those payments, whatever the commercial terms are associated with that truck. What that does is it sets you on a path to make sure that you've got trucks in your fleet that are not older than 5 years, and it should put you at roughly a 2.5-year-old average truck life, which is a great place to be as a FedEx contractor, but you as a contractor have a decision to make of how you're gonna meet that need. What's the least cost-intensive way that still fits within my operation? And a lease may not fit in your operation if your mileage is high. You might have to consider some of your trucks being financed. But in those instances where there are 35,000 miles a year or less, a lease can be a lot more cost-efficient way to meet that need. And you can know that you've got a foundation of, if I'm putting 2 trucks into my operation every single year, I am protecting myself. I'm protecting the operation from the negative impact of waiting until 5 years is up to try to figure out what I'm going to do, because you've been planning a little bit at a time all along to make sure you're not in that position. So when it comes to fleet strategy, that is a key thing to consider to protect your operation. Another piece of that strategy is you can see the benefit when it comes to COVID. Let's just talk about that for just a minute, when we've had all of these supply chain challenges. If your truck is not that old, meaning it's averaging around that 2.5-year life because you've put this fleet strategy in place, then you're not going to have to go to the dealership as often as many of your fellow contractors. And so those parts that aren't available and force your truck to literally sit on a lot for 2 months because they can't get the parts, and you're having to rent a truck in the meantime, and if you finance the truck, you're still making the payment on that truck in the meantime because they don't just turn the payment off just because you can't use it. You've got some real financial burden on the operation that is a result of not planning appropriately when you could have. And again, applying this strategy has worked very well for us. And there's, again, no one size fits all because everyone's territory is different. Their mileage considerations are different. But using these two solutions with an overall goal toward how can I make sure that I'm replacing 20% of my fleet each year is the right mindset. It's the foundation for having a sound fleet that is minimizing your capital outlay. In closing, we have covered a lot of different aspects of the benefits, the pros and the cons of purchasing a truck versus leasing a truck. We've talked about the terms related with both sides. We've talked about fleet strategy and how to meet the needs of your operation and how both of those options can fit into that. We've talked about end of life, meaning end of lease term or end of financing term life, and whose responsibility, what the benefits are, how leasing can give you some options maybe that the financing side doesn't in that instance. We've talked about maintenance cost and fuel efficiency related to those trucks. So just to reiterate here, there's no one size fits all solution, and you as a contractor, all financing and all leasing, you're probably not needing to be in either one of those buckets. You're probably better off to diversify between those two. So it's best to understand both sides of that, really give consideration to the pros and cons that we've discussed here and how they apply to you so that you can make the best decision for you. And as always, Hello Truck Lease is in a position to be able to answer some questions if there's something more specific to your operation that we haven't covered here.